What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with a subscriber Q&A video. I've got lots of good content from you guys. Thank you so much for all of the great questions and comments, and it spans the gamut across a wide range of topics. And before I dig in any further, I want to mention one thing. I am going to start releasing my videos a day early to my Patreon supporters. So if you're a Patreon supporter, thank you. Number one, you guys allowed this channel to happen and the way it is. So thank you very much. And when I post a new video, letting you know a new video is coming, in the description on Patreon, there will be a link, and it's for unlisted videos, and it goes live for everybody the following day. But I feel like to my Patreon supporters, you guys deserve to see videos earlier if that's what you want. I think the biggest reason would be for the what to buy videos. You guys should have first pickings of everything I find on eBay that's for sale. And a lot of those items sell pretty quickly after the video goes up. So I think it's only fair to my Patreon supporters that you guys get first dibs on the videos. And so just if you're a Patreon supporter, be on the lookout for that. And if you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, it's patreon.com/actionfiguregrader. Let's go ahead and dig right into some awesome comments that really span the gamut. Joe Schmo, and Joe is a long-time subscriber, very long, so thank you, Joe. He says, you used to collect G.I. Joes, old subscriber. The old vintage carded G.I. Joes have almost a defect where the bubble pulls away ever so slightly to the point where you could fit a pencil tip in it. That would not be considered sealed, correct? It's usually dead center in the middle. And to answer your question, no, this is actually a very common thing with vintage Hasbro G.I. Joes. I had a very large collection of AFA graded mint on card G.I. Joes back in the old days. I think I got up to about 80 or 85, somewhere in there. And I just decided to sell them all and focus on Star Wars. So that's what I did. But I had a number of factory stamped examples. It was just a defect at the factory where when they pressed it onto the card back, there sometimes was a little gap there. And you do see that at the bottom of the bubble stem on Empire Strikes Back cards for Star Wars. That's something that you're really common. You see a big gap in there. You also see them on vintage collection items. But I know what you're talking about, Joe, and I should have pulled up a photo to include for those of you who are not aware. But if it's factory stamped and it hasn't been manipulated at all, AFA understands that, or CAS, or whoever, and they will grade accordingly, and they probably will ding it for having a blister that's not quite perfect. But I wouldn't let that deter you from trying to send that in, because it was a common factory defect for those Hasbro G.I. Joes. Jeff Moore, shout out to Jeff. He's a longtime subscriber and commenter as well. He says, I'm going to a convention next month. I want to get something autographed. Which would be better, a mock figure or a comic? Does either one have more collectible appeal than the other? Just curious as to what your thoughts. Okay, so this is me speaking personally. Everyone's got their own opinion. I personally would not get a comic book autographed because it's just not quite as valuable unless it's graded. And to get a graded autographed comic, it has to be signed in front of either a CGC or CBCS representative. CBCS does do what's called a verified signature, but it's already been proven on YouTube that someone kind of sent a fake in. So I kind of question the value of some of those CBCS verified signatures versus a witnessed signature label. So if you're not going to get it graded and you don't care, then fine, do whatever you want. But I think from a collectible value perspective, I would stick with mint on card Star Wars items. I would not go with vintage Kenner ones like you see here in the thumbnail for the video. This one is on Collector Archive Services website. It's been signed by Dave Prowse. In general, vintage Kenner stuff, especially something rare like this Takara, it's going to be worth more unsigned. And if you're going to get anything signed, I would recommend using Power of the Force 2 figures. That's what I have in my collection. I've got like 6 to 8 of those. And CAS, Collector Archive Services, you pay an extra fee of like $35 or so, and James Spence Authentication will verify and authenticate the signature. It includes a certificate of authentication, and then you also have to pay for the actual grading of the mint on card item. Now, that's just my personal opinion on it because I collect graded stuff. If you're not going to get anything graded, then do what you want. But from a collectability standpoint and from a resale perspective, so to speak, I think you're going to be better off getting action figures signed but not vintage Kenner. I would go with Power of the Force 2 or Vintage Collection or Saga, whatever. I would stay away from vintage Kenner stuff, getting those signed personally. That's just my personal opinion. Some people like it, I don't. Star Killer, he says some great questions and answers. He's talking about with the new 3-packs or the 4-pack, like I have again in the thumbnail for this video, the Bad Batch 4-pack. There was a couple of new ones that were just announced by Hasbro. I think one of them is an Amazon exclusive for Kenobi. There's also like an Imperial Troopers type 3-pack that's coming out. And going back to Star Killer's question, he's saying, should you get the whole thing graded versus break them up and get them graded individually? And to answer your question, yes. I got both of them. I took a Bad Batch 4-pack and I got the whole thing graded. It's at CAS right now. And then I also took another one and I sent it in to get them all graded individually. So I got the uncirculated designation. We'll see how they turn out. It'll probably be another 3 years, but by the time I get them back. But it all depends on what you like. I think there's going to be less of these graded just because of the size. But I think, and there's also risk if you open it up and it wasn't packed quite properly, which happens a lot with Hasbro, then you're going to get lower grades on those. I tried both ways. I'll let you know how it goes. They should be back probably towards the end of the year is my guess, but they look awesome. I love the way these look. It really harkens back to some of those multi-packs like in Canada and things like that from the Vintage Kenner run. I believe there's a really nice one up for auction right now on Hakes, but you got to do what you want to do. But me personally, I like them inside this big box, mainly because of the back of the boxes. The backs of these things, especially the Bad Batch one, have incredible artwork on it, and it's a shame to not show that. And I felt like with something like these Clone Troopers for the Bad Batch 4-pack, it's going to look good both ways, and so I want them both ways. But if you're tight on your budget, then I would just send one, because getting this single big still sealed in the multi-pack box is going to still be cheaper than grading 4 of them individually. So if you're tight on money, that's the other factor you got to keep in mind. Okay, Jumping General, he says, I buy off eBay, and to your point, there is nothing more frustrating than asking a seller a question and they ignore me. Most of us are there to sell something, and part of this process is respectful customer service. Move along or move on. And this is going back to, my tip about, if you see something for sale on eBay and there's not enough photos, or the photos are grainy, or they just show it inside of a clamshell and you want better photos and they don't respond, they're probably trying to hide something. And when that happens to me, I don't buy from them, and I just move along. I ignore them because clearly they're trying to hide something, or they're too lazy to provide photos, in which case I'm guessing at that point what I'm getting, and it's just not worth the risk, in my opinion. So eBay, it can be good, but I try to avoid buying on eBay whenever possible now. I still do, but mainly for CGC 9.8s and for certain Star Wars items if it's something I really, really want. But I just try to avoid as best I can dealing with idiots, and there are idiots in everything, and there's certainly a lot of idiot sellers on eBay. Tony Rica, he's a Patreon supporter. Many thanks, Tony. And this is talking about my video about the toy industry and whether our Star Wars collections, like all the stuff you see behind me, is it going to be worth anything one day as my generation starts to keel over and die and become worm food? Are the spouses going to just dump them all, and there's going to be a glut of this stuff, a big supplied glut in 30 years? I don't know. Tony says that, just look at all the content that's out there for Disney Plus. Look at the comic book market and how the comic book market has been around for a long time. And a lot of those rare early comics still command big, big money. So I don't know the answer, but, Tony says there's always going to be another generation. And with something as iconic as Star Wars, it should still be collectible. I had other viewpoints that I'm going to share in a second, but I tend to lean on the side of it's probably going to pull back a little bit, all the vintage Kenner stuff, even the vintage collection, maybe even comic books, because I feel like the next generation, my kids' generation, they just don't collect. They just don't. My son's got a small collection, but he's kind of moved away from it. He's really more into kind of electronics and stuff like that now. And I just don't know if they're going to have the same love as they mature and get older, as they get my age, and they have deeper pockets than they do right now. Are they going to want to go back and collect this stuff? You obviously have space constraints. I wouldn't be able to collect if I didn't have my own room that's devoted to my Star Wars collection. And my wife complains about it all the time, but it's the one room in the house that she cannot control, and I love it. But otherwise, she has free reign to do whatever she wants with the rest of my house. A lot of people don't have that option. You know, if you live in a one-bedroom flat or two-bedroom flat and you're unmarried with no kids, you are constrained by your space. And so all of those factors, I think, will play in addition to our generation aging out. And Tony seems to think we're going to be okay long-term. I don't know the answer. One quick question that came over Instagram from Daniel Egan. And he is a subscriber, and I wanted to post this up here in case somebody can help him. I doubt it, but I want to post this up. Daniel is an actor. He was in Rogue One, the movie Rogue One. He played a pilot. And there was a prototype toy that was up for sale for 1,200 pounds at the time, and it was an 18-inch version of Daniel's face on in a pilot's outfit, and it was a prototype toy. This was auctioned off in Harrods department store, London, in the summer of 2016. It was an exhibition of Star Wars marquettes. I only have a couple of photos that were sent to me. I would love to know if any collector bought it. And obviously he's interested in getting it himself. So if you happen to own this item, or you know someone, a collector that does own this item, I would really appreciate you reaching out to me by email at actionfiguregrader@gmail.com or on Instagram at actionfiguregrader. Because Daniel, who was the actor that was portrayed in this toy, this prototype that was never released, it's 18 inches tall. He would love to be able to find the owner of this and buy it, is my guess. So just reach out to me if you happen to have any information on that. Jack in the Box, shout out to Jack in the Box. He has his own YouTube channel, so be sure to check him out. He said Van Gogh never sold a painting during his lifetime. He had no idea his works would be adorned in museums around the world. The future is always hazy, but I feel the vintage Star Wars figures will eventually be considered some of the best examples of 20th century American art. And quite honestly, I don't disagree with that. I think that there is an artistic aspect, especially to comic books, but even to action figures, and that's partially why I do grade a lot of my action figures, is that they are little miniature pieces of art. The movies represent, you know, a certain kind of iconic cultural aspect to society that I think will resonate in the future. And you know, so we'll see. We'll see. And I've got some other comments on that hopefully I can bring up in a little bit. But Cobra Kai, Steve, he's another Patreon supporter. Thank you. I think the success of the new Star Wars media and the uptake of it by younger people. Think about all the young kids who watched Kenobi, the Book of Boba Fett, and of course The Mandalorian, which has crossed over into mainstream success. Think about those kids and where they're going to be in 20 or 30 years. Are they going to look at that stuff and want to buy it all? I don't know the answer. He says there's still a good 30 years left of the core group of us old guys, myself included in that old guy description. And our disposable income is going up. And I would agree with that too. I can afford bigger and more elaborate Star Wars collecting items now than even I could 5 years ago, or certainly 10 or 15 years ago. My budget's different than it was because I'm maturing in my career, and my disposable income has gone up, you know, as a result of that. I'm not alone in that. It's not everybody. There's certainly people out there struggling and they have very small collecting budgets, and that's okay too. But he's saying that prices can't go anywhere but up, and that's going to be interesting to see whether that holds up or not. But me personally, I do think there's going to be a pullback at some point as my generation ages, but we'll see. I think just because of supply. Manguli, he says, I'm a Gen Z collector seller who has thought a lot about this same topic that we've been covering here with some of these other comments. I don't like vintage Kenner items. I only buy vintage collection, Black Series, and Hot Toys. And so what the gist of his comment is that he's worried that young collectors, they are not going to be focused on vintage Kenner stuff because they didn't collect it growing up. They're going to look at like Clone Wars and the vintage collection, Black Series, all that stuff. I don't know. I think the only question I have is that there's such a ready supply of this modern stuff that is high grade versus vintage Kenner stuff that admittedly was produced in much larger numbers than it is today, but is it still in high grade? I don't know the answer. It seems like the population reports for a lot of these AFA items, they're numbering even common stuff like an AFA 80 Empire Strikes Back Han Solo. There's not that many of them in an AFA 80 condition. Whereas if you look at 20 years from now, how many Black Series figures for Han Solo are going to be in an AFA 80? A lot more is my guess. So I don't know. I think it's a supply and demand thing, but is there going to be more demand for these modern items 20 years from now versus vintage Kenner stuff? And I don't know the answer. It's a good question, but that's what he's thinking. He's thinking that the modern stuff 20 or 30 years from now is going to be in more demand from my kids' generation as my generation passes away. So it'll be interesting to see, and that's a great comment. L. Taylor, this is a good comment. I wanted to mention this. He says, why are there no High Republic merchandise for sale, such as action figures? If you look at Shadows of the Empire, there were like toys for the Power of the Force 2 line. There was even Micro Machines Shadows of the Empire type stuff. Why is there not stuff like that for the High Republic yet? And this is a good topic, but I think you need to remember is that there's such a backlog right now for existing Disney Plus content. Let's look at some of the characters missing for Rogue One even. Book of Boba Fett, there's a lot of characters missing. Certainly the Kenobi series, and now you got Andor coming out. You got the Ahsoka series coming out. You got Mandalorian Season 3. Those are established brands. The High Republic, they're starting from scratch. They're starting from scratch with a whole new kind of era within the Star Wars canon. So they're slow playing it. They had phase 1 with novels and comics. They've got phase 2 with the comics and novels coming out this fall. And eventually I think we'll see some Disney Plus content. I've heard that the new Disney animated series, The Acolyte, is going to take place in the High Republic era. I think they have to build the demand. I think if you put on the shelves right now a vintage collection High Republic Keith Trennis, who's one of the main characters, or Avar Kriss, or Stellan Gios, if you put one of those on the pegs right now in the vintage collection, in retail, it would be a peg warmer. Because most mainstream collectors, most mainstream Star Wars fans, they're not reading the novels or the comics, in my opinion. And I think it's only the hardcore Star Wars fans like me, or potentially like L. Taylor, who are reading that stuff and getting immersed in this new era, getting used to the characters and the backstories behind them. But I think that the time will come, but I think we're a good solid 3 to 5 years away before we see anything action figure related for the High Republic universe. But it's a great comment, and I wanted to talk about that. Jason Brennan, he says, the vintage high-grade Star Wars toys will always be in high demand. I caution you on that. I never want to deal in absolutes because I don't think always can be guaranteed with anything. I think a lot of the toys from the 30s and 40s that were very, very expensive, some still are, but some of them are not. Even like Hot Wheels and things like that. So I don't know, but he says this is a good comment though, they're undervalued relative to sports cards and much cooler in my opinion. I do agree with this, and this is something I've talked about on the channel before, that high-grade Star Wars toys, it is chump change, absolute chump change compared to the comic book market. Comic books can sell for millions and millions of dollars. The most desirable Star Wars figure, I would argue, is probably the rocket-firing Boba Fett prototype, right? There's probably 50 to 100 of those out there, and they sell for $200,000 plus. That is chump change relative to some of the high-grade, really expensive, very desirable Amazing Fantasy 15. A Hulk 181 in a 9.8 just sold for over what that rocket-firing Fett did, I believe. So I do think that there is an aspect there, but going back to my previous point, there's also a larger supply relative to a high-grade early comic like a first Batman or a first Spider-Man comic. So I don't know if we'll ever see those prices, but I do agree with him that it's very undervalued relative to comic books or even sports cards, things like that. So I don't know. I don't know if Jason is right here, but I do think that there is a Wall Street kind of aspect to action figures that has not quite hit yet. It certainly has hit comic books. It certainly has hit trading cards with these massive prices, but even modern rookie cards for like Giannis or Michael Jordan or some of these, Mike Trout, the baseball player, those prices are just astronomical relative to high-grade action figures. And I do think that there's room there for that spread, that delta between action figures and comics and trading cards to narrow, but I don't think we'll ever get to those prices personally. Maybe it happens. Maybe it happens as a lot of these Wall Street companies, acquire more of these grading companies. We'll see. Obviously, Diamond Partners just bought AFA. I would imagine CAS will get bought in the next 3 to 5 years too. So I think if Wall Street really enters the space and makes it quote unquote cool for really high net worth individuals to have action figures, and kind of include that as part of their quote unquote portfolio of collectibles, I think you'll see those prices skyrocket. And they already have, right? They've already gone up way, way higher, big multiples for high grade rare Star Wars figures versus even 5 years ago. So whether that happens in the future, who knows? Stuart Norris, he says, Disney had the perfect opportunity to explore the criminal underworld within Boba Fett. They could have brought in the original trilogy bounty hunters and mixed them with Black Sun Syndicate, as well as Crimson Dawn and the Pike Syndicate. And this is going back to my video about how to make better Disney Plus content. I had 5 ideas, and one of those was exploring the criminal underworld. The Book of Boba Fett dropped the ball. They could have incorporated everything that Stuart's talking about here. Crimson Dawn, the Pike Syndicate, like Bosk and the other bounty hunters from the original trilogy, they could have done that. And instead we got the mod-looking biker gang and a storyline that was not great overall, with 2 episodes that completely bypassed Boba Fett. And those 2 episodes, by the way, were probably the best in the Book of Boba Fett since they focused on the Mandalorian. It was a huge missed opportunity. Terrible, terrible job by the writers. And I hope that they really do explore the criminal underworld, because it's criminally, pun intended, underrepresented in Disney Plus live content. So we'll see if that happens. L. Taylor, again, I think I've got 2 comments from him here. I think collecting as we know it is a Gen Y thing, mostly because material produced during our childhood versus the original material coming out today. We collect out of nostalgia and fear of missing out. Gen Z won't be nostalgic about toys because they've never had any, and they never worry about missing out on anything of this era of on-demand and streaming. It's an interesting comment. Again, thank you, L. Taylor, for the other comment. I didn't realize I got 2 of you in there, but and to that point, if I didn't include your comment, I hope to include it in a future episode. But again, it's a generational thing that I'm not sure will hold up vintage Star Wars prices or even the vintage collection long term. I hope it does, but I'm not counting on it. Put it that way. It's not like it's the end of the world if everything drops to 0. But I do think that there's going to be some inherent value in a lot of these Star Wars items, as long as the brand is well managed by Disney, and that is the key. And certainly Disney has had its issues thus far here recently. Next up, this is going back to my recession video. Nary M says, great video. It's definitely important to remember that the savings people currently hold versus, year-to-date projections versus, longer term. He's saying, is the savings metrics that I discussed in that video really accurate? Because people have savings from many years ago. And that's a good point. I think that that savings for Americans in general is way too low. And the guy, Michael, what's his name, from The Big Short, he's saying that savings rates for Americans are dropping drastically from all-time highs, and they're going to go negative this fall, if they're not already, just due to high inflation. But whether a lot of these folks, we talked about living paycheck to paycheck versus, budgeting and saving some of your money, and that it is possible, even at low income levels, to do that. You just got to live lean. I know I've had to do that myself, but it is a big question mark in my mind as to how our economy holds up now that, in my opinion, we're already in a recession. Inflation doesn't seem to be going away. The Fed says they're going to get aggressive on rates, and that'll further dampen the economy. Today is July 7th, and projected layoffs for corporations is the highest they've been in 2.5 years. So I think that the employment rate, which has been the one stalwart, the one beacon of hope, that is going to start to decline. And I think that the major recession indicators are there, but we're still at the very early stages of it. And how all of that combined with inflation affects people's savings rates and how badly they deplete their current savings is a big question. And I'll leave you with this. This is terrifying. the staggering pace of new debt. This is for the U.S., total outstanding debt. It took 215 years for the U.S. to reach a total debt level of $7 trillion. The U.S. has added another $7 trillion just since March of 2020. Think about that. In a year, let's call that a little over 2 years, we doubled the amount of debt we've got. It took 215 years of the U.S.'s existence, the entirety of the U.S. And we're now almost about $30 trillion in debt. So this is terrifying to me, okay? And, I know that doesn't relate to savings rates, but this kind of stuff should really open your eyes as to where the U.S. economy is and where our debt level is and how that affects the U.S. economy long term as we try to deal with this. I mean, how are we going to deal with this much debt? But this graph literally was the most terrifying thing I've seen in a long time. And I've seen some I live with twin 10-year-olds. I see a lot of terrifying things, all right? So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.